know if I'm the only one, but when I run into a dish at a restaurant that I absolutely love, I always wonder how difficult it would be to recreate at home. So that's what we're gonna try to do today. I'm taking a delicious fall dish that I had and trying to turn it into something a little bit different. I hope you'll stick with me while I develop a new recipe. Hey there, welcome back to my kitchen. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I am developing a recipe today. I find that when I'm developing recipes, there's a few different dishes that are pretty easy to make that let me test the flavor profile of something and then become another one of those dishes in my arsenal. I'm gonna try to turn the fall flavors in a butternut squash soup into a quiche. Quiche is at its most basic, a pie crust, an egg component, and some mix-ins in the form of veggies or fruit, meat, whatever you want to include. So not a super complicated dish, but one that really allows me to test out different flavor profiles as I'm trying to recreate things. And it will also serve double duty since I can serve it to my friends tomorrow. Okay, so the flavor profile that I'm trying to recreate. The base was definitely butternut squash. There was definitely also some oniony flavor in the background, and I thought using a leek might be interesting. I really like butternut squash with fennel. Fennel is one of my favorite fall flavors, so I thought I would try some fennel as well. For a little bit of sweetness, I'm gonna use some apple. I don't know what kind of apples these are. They're from a tree in my garden, but they're nice and sweet, so 3 kind of small-ish apples. I've got some pork sausage here. Pork feels like it will go really nicely with these blonder ingredients that I have on the bench. And then I'm probably gonna end up topping this quiche with a little bit of cheese. So I have about 4 ounces of gruyere. I also think I want to add a little bit of maple syrup somewhere in this. So I'm gonna figure out how to do that as well, a couple tablespoons of maple syrup. Earlier today, you saw me make and blind bake this pie crust. And if you didn't, I'll link the video up here. So we're gonna prep our mix-ins. We're gonna prep our eggy bit, which is coconut cream, couple of eggs, and some Gruyere cheese. And then we're gonna combine those 2 things and put them in my blind baked pie crust, put it in the oven and bake it until the eggs are set. No special tools or equipment are necessary today. It does help to have a pie tin, but you can really build pie in a variety of vessels. You can also take some help from the store and use a store-bought crust. You do want to blind bake the store-bought crust, which means bake it before you put all of the ingredients in it. So just follow the instructions on the store-bought crust for that. But other than that, the only thing left is really to get going. So the first thing I'm gonna do is get some sausage cooking on the stove behind me. I'm just gonna put this into a pan over about a medium heat and let it start to brown. Next up, I'm gonna prep the veggies that are going into this dish. This is 1 full butternut squash that I have peeled, taken the seeds out of, and then roasted at 400 for like 20 to 30 minutes. This squash is soft. So with the other textures in this dish, I wanna maintain a little bit of crisp and crunchy so that there's a variety of textures in our quiche. So also on the bench beside me, I have 1 leek that I have cleaned well and chopped, and I have 1 fennel bulb that I have cleaned well and chopped. I'll show you how to do both of those things right now. This is a butternut squash. There are several different ways to prepare butternut squash. I'm gonna show you one of the ways that I like to do it today. 2 of the perhaps most common are just simply to have the butternut squash, carve out the seeds, and then roast it in the oven. We're gonna take that preparation 1 step further. I'm going to peel it, have it, pull out the seeds, and then cut it into chunks and roast it in a hot oven. When you roast it, it gets kind of caramelly, a little bit sweeter. You get some nice texture changes in the butternut squash if parts of it get kind of crispy. So I'm a big fan of roasting it. It just brings out a ton of great natural flavor. So this is about a medium-sized butternut squash, and the first thing I do to prepare it is to peel it. So just using a carrot peeler. Missing the bowl at every chance I can. Peeled butternut squash down to mostly the yellow. There's a little bit of white bits left. That's no problem at all. Now, I'm gonna cut the bottom off and cut the top off. And using that bottom that I cut as a semi-stable base, I'm just gonna cut from the top down, lengthwise through the center of the butternut squash. Now, using a spoon, we carve the seeds out. And now we're gonna roast it on a very well-used cookie sheet. So however is easiest for you, we're gonna take this down into about inch chunks. There's a couple different ways to do this. I like to start at the bottom end and cut until I've cut through where those seeds were. Again, always using a flat side as a stable base, so you're not trying to cut when it's rocking back and forth. And then I just chunk these up. They don't need to be super exact. It's the beauty of being a home chef, that you don't have to worry too much about things like exactly cutting the same size butternut squash. You do want to keep them relatively close to the same size so that they will cook evenly, but other than that, I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's interesting the things that people get picky about when it comes to cooking. The reality is, no one's in your kitchen but you. My advice is to take advice from people you ask, from people who have been in your kitchen, or from people who are eating your food. Nobody else really matters. Cut your squash however you want. Now, olive oil, just a drizzle. Good pinch of salt. Preheated oven. Lots of good pepper. Mix around with your hands. Just trying to make sure the butternut squash is all coated with salt, pepper, and oil. Single layer into a preheated 400-degree oven for probably 20 to 25 minutes, or until the soft is squashed and has started to take on some color. This vegetable is a leek. A leek is in the allium family, which is the same as onions and garlic. It's a little bit more mellow than onion though. The thing about leeks is that they are grown in sandy soil and they can be incredibly dirty. So I've washed the outside of these leeks, but I'm gonna show you the way that I like to also wash the inside. Cut off the tops, cut off the roots, cut this in half. You can see here all sorts of different layers, kind of like an onion. Slice them into rings. And then in front of me, I have a bowl of water and a sieve. And this is just for demonstration purposes. Typically, I would do this over the sink. Sometimes they're really sandy, sometimes they're not that sandy. The problem is you don't want to take a gamble. So I ensure that after I cut up leeks, I separate the layers and give them a really solid rinse, just in case. And there are our leeks clean. You can see the water's a little bit cloudy. Not too much sand in there on these, which is great. But again, better safe than sorry. So the butternut squash, I'm not gonna take any further. This is done until we're ready to mix up the ingredients for our quiche. The leek and fennel and apple, I am gonna cook just the tiniest bit. So I'm gonna combine the full leek with the full bulb of fennel. And then I'm gonna chop up a couple of these apples. I'm not going to peel them, I am going to core them. So when you're making a quiche, I find that it really helps to pre-cook any of the meat that you want to put in and make sure you at least start to sweat your veggies. It will cook for about an hour in the oven. So these veggies and fruit will get some more time in the oven, but I don't want them to be completely lacking texture. So I'm not gonna cook them very long on the stovetop. Now, these apples are gonna sit on my bench for a little while the pork sausage cooks. So I'm gonna top them with a little bit of lemon juice. Lemon helps fruits not to brown. So this works for potatoes, it works for apples, it works for a lot of different things. This isn't gonna add much flavor, if any at all. The purpose is more just to keep the apples from browning. Our oven has preheated to 350, and these veggies are ready to go in with the sausage when it is browned. So I just gave our sausage a quick stir. It's browning nicely. And I have been thinking about herbs and seasonings for this quiche. I am very specifically holding myself back from going crazy with fall seasonings. I'd love to add a ton of sage, a ton of thyme, a ton of rosemary, but I'm not gonna do that today. I'm gonna reserve the fennel fronds to sprinkle over the top of the quiche after it comes out of the oven. And then I'm just gonna add some dried sage, just a little bit, probably about a tablespoon of dried sage, crushed up. This is sage that I dried last season. And the reason for that, the dish that I'm trying to recreate didn't really scream sage or rosemary, and those are pretty strong herbs. I didn't really detect those too much at all. I want something that kind of is mellow in the background and not something that like slaps you in the face with your first bite. So I'm gonna put about a tablespoon of dried sage and see where that gets us in the final result. So the only other thing that I'll add to that veggie mixture then is salt and pepper. So I'm gonna salt and pepper it now, may as well. So a big like 3-finger pinch of salt and a lot of pepper. So that completes the filling for our quiche with one quick addition. I have about 3 tablespoons of maple syrup here. I'm gonna add this once the veggies and the sausage have had a chance to cook together and just stir it through. Hopefully it's some nice smoky sweetness in the background, but who knows, it might be unnecessary with the apples, but I really feel like maple will go really well with these flavors. I'm gonna put these 2 things over by the stove and come back to mix up the egg mixture. Sausage is cooking, veg and fruit is ready to go in when we're ready for it. Now to mix up the egg mixture. There are all sorts of very specific ratios about how many eggs to how much milk, cream, coconut milk, additional liquid should go into a quiche. And I believe the most commonly held belief is about 1 egg to about 1/2 cup of cream or some other liquid. I'm gonna bump up the eggs in this a little bit, so I'm going for 4 eggs. I'm using coconut cream. It'll give kind of a nice mellow coconutty flavor in the background, but you probably won't even notice that it's not full fat cream. So to make this egg mixture, very, very simple. I'm gonna crack 4 eggs into a bowl. Add to it 1.5 cups of coconut cream, salt and pepper, big pinch of salt, several grinds of pepper, and we whisk. The only thing we're trying to do here is incorporate the coconut milk in the eggs. We don't need to whip any air into them, nothing like that, just stirring it up. True to form, I've picked a bowl that is too small. Perfect. Last step here is to mix in the cheese. So I'm just gonna add our 4 ounces of cheese into this cream mixture. Okay, egg mixture is ready to roll. On to the sausage. It looks like it's browned. I'm gonna add those veggies in. So now I'm gonna add a couple tablespoons of maple syrup and just stir to coat. Actually gonna kill the heat. Okay, that looks all stirred together nicely. Not too much liquid left in the bottom of the pan, which is great. I'm gonna pull this off the heat. Okay, so our cooked mixture, sausage, apples, fennel, leeks, sage, salt and pepper. I'm gonna gently stir in our butternut squash. I don't wanna break the butternut squash up. I just wanna make sure that these two things are mixed together, so when we have a bite of the quiche, we get a little bit of everything in every bite. So I'm gonna give this a taste test. Since I'm making this recipe up, I don't know what the flavors are gonna taste like together, but I do know that if I don't like it at this point, I'm not gonna like it in the quiche. So this is kind of my chance to adjust seasonings and flavors. Getting a little sweetness from the apple, sweetness from the butternut squash, kind of a background of maple, but it's more smoky than sweet. I like the leek flavor. The fennel is still crunchy. It could benefit from something a little bit spicy. So I'm gonna make note of that. Maybe I'll add red chili flake the next time I do this. But for now, I think I'm gonna leave it as is. I also might need to work on my measurements because this looks like a lot of filling for this pie crust, but that's, I think, very on brand for me. Okay, so next step is to put the filling into the pie crust, and I'm only gonna fill it to about 7/8 full to make sure that we have some room for our eggs, milk, cheese. Well, this is why we recipe test. I have about twice as much filling as I need. This will not go to waste though. This is gonna be delicious scrambled up with some eggs. In fact, that might be my dinner this evening. So I've got the quiche pretty full, but still I think enough room for our egg mixture. So I'm gonna pour this over the top. You'll notice that I'm on a cookie sheet here. So if things get really out of hand and it starts to boil over, it'll boil over into the cookie sheet, which is no big deal. This is a very full quiche. We'll see how much it boils over. So this is going into a 350-degree oven, and I think it'll probably take about an hour. What I'm looking for is the eggs to be set. So everything else is cooked. All I'm looking for is the eggs to be set, and usually that takes like 45 minutes to an hour 15. But since this is a new recipe, I can't tell you for sure. But I will tell you when it comes out of the oven. So I'll see you in like an hour-ish. 1 hour of cook time and about 15 minutes of rest time later, and we have a beautiful quiche. It's really hard for me to tell when quiche is done. It has always been really hard for me to tell when quiche is done. You can tell when it's obviously not done because there's a ton of jiggle in the eggs in the center of the quiche. But for me, this time, since I'm experimenting, my best guess is that it would take about an hour. It looks pretty done. The crust is cooked well, the cheese is brown, so we're gonna give it a go. We could get into it and realize that the cook time needs to be longer, and I'll know that for the next time I test out this recipe. The only thing I have on my bench is a serrated knife. I found that that is usually best to cut through a quiche with, and then the reserved fennel fronds from the fennel that I chopped up earlier, those are just gonna go right on top. So I'm gonna break into this. Cross your fingers. We did pretty well. Definitely not runny. Pick it apart, give it a taste, see how we did. So the bottom crust, see if it's well cooked. Nice and flaky. The flavors are spot on. The maple is delicious. You can really taste the smokiness of the maple in the background. There's some crunch left. The apple pieces are about the right size. There's actually a little bit of give left in the butternut squash too. It's not completely mushy. Let's get into this crust a little bit more. Little crack on the crust. It looks cooked. I'm pretty happy with this. Strangely happy with this. I don't expect things to turn out the first time I make them. I was pretty confident in what the flavors were in that recipe that I was trying to recreate in quiche form, and I think I got pretty close to it. I do think I can add some more herbs though, so I might bump up the sage next time. I'm not sure that I would change much. I think it's a pretty good recipe the first time out of the gate. And of course, I have to adjust the amounts of everything that I'm using since I had about twice as much filling as I actually needed. That volume problem is a pretty typical problem for me, so I usually adjust that several times throughout the course of developing a recipe. Well, we did it. Another successful day in the test kitchen, developing another recipe. But I'm always curious, what would you do differently? Are these flavors you would ever put together? Is this something you would enjoy eating? And if so, what would you change? Please let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for being here with me today and testing another recipe. I hope you enjoyed. If you liked this video, please give it a like. If you want to see more from me, please subscribe to my channel, and I'll look forward to seeing you here next time. Cheers.